Welcome back, viewers. You're watching Beyond World is One. This is World DNA, the show that gets your head off the rest. I'm Shivan Chandna.
And I'm Raisha Sehgal. On the show today, French and German leaders have said that Ukraine should be allowed to use Western weapons against military sites in Russia. However, White House says that it still opposes Ukraine using US arms against Russia, while Ukraine continues to plead with the West for permission to use these weapons to hit Russian targets. Moscow has opened a new front that could perhaps threaten Ukraine's second largest city, Kharkiv. We'll of course be tracking all of that on World DNA.
Also on the show today, South Africa, it heads to polls, and in the most competitive election since the end of the apartheid, the ruling African National Party will be put to test for the very first time in history. The question being, can ANC hold on to power? And is the opposition rising on an anti-incumbency mood? We are going to be tracking that closely. Stay tuned. Let's get you started with the headlines.
Israel's IDF says hidden store of weapons may have been behind a deadly blaze in Rafah's tent camp, and that its airstrike targeting area used small munitions unable of igniting such blaze.
Washington backs Netanyahu, says recent Rafah deaths do not constitute major ground operation that crosses any US red lines.
France and Germany say Ukraine should be allowed to hit military sites inside Russia from which missiles were being fired at Ukrainian regions, but not other targets. White House still opposes this proposal.
Says NATO members in Europe playing with fire by proposing to let Ukraine use Western weapons to strike deep inside Russia, underlines such activity could trigger global conflict.
Georgia's parliament votes to override presidential veto of Russian-inspired foreign agent law, defying fierce demonstrations at home and abroad.
Defense and prosecution deliver closing arguments in Donald Trump's historic New York criminal hush money trial as both sides finish final pitches to 12-member jury before they begin deliberations.
China helps Nepal look for oil as Beijing seeks to strengthen bilateral ties and competes with India for influence over Himalayan neighbor.
More details stumble out in Pune's high-profile Porsche case. Police say 14 calls exchanged between doctor held for switching the sample and the blood sample and father of teen accused 2 hours prior to the sample collection.
Lexi Thompson confirms that she will retire at the end of the 2024 PGA Tour season. The 29-year-old has won 15 times since turning professional in 2010 and won her only major in 2014. Two big NATO powers, France and Germany, have said that Ukraine should be allowed to hit military sites inside Russia.
But only those Russian sites from which missiles are being fired towards Ukrainian territory, not other targets. That's the rider which has been given to Ukraine. Now, this comes amid Ukrainian President Zelensky's consistent pleas to the Western allies to allow using their weapons against military targets inside Russian territory. French President Emmanuel Macron further clarified that he is not escalating by extending his support to Ukraine, since it is Russia that is organizing itself in this way. During a joint news conference in Germany, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz backed Macron, saying that as long as Ukraine respected the conditions laid out by the countries that supplied those weapons, it was allowed to defend itself.
So we're staying exactly within the same framework. We think that we should allow them to neutralize the military sites from which the missiles are fired, and basically the military sites from which Ukraine is attacked. But we must not allow them to hit other targets in Russia, obviously civilian capabilities or other military targets.
Civiles ou d'autres cibles militaires.
However, Russian President Vladimir Putin earlier warned the West that NATO members in Europe were playing with fire by proposing to let Ukraine use Western-supplied weapons to strike inside Russia.
Representatives of NATO countries, especially in Europe, especially in the small countries, they should be aware of what they are playing with. They should remember that as countries with small, densely populated territories. And this is a factor that they should keep in mind before talking about striking Russian territory.
Speaking during a state visit to Uzbekistan, Putin directly accused the US of wanting a global conflict.
He said the ground offensive being carried out by Moscow's forces in Ukraine's northeastern Kharkiv region is the result of Ukrainian strikes on Russian territory. He added, if Ukraine continues to strike residential areas, Russia will be forced to create security zones.
Everything now revolves around the events on the approaches to Kharkiv. So it was them who provoked these events in this direction. 6 months ago, I publicly said, if they continue to strike residential areas and neighborhoods, we will be forced to create security zones. And just recently, I said so. We moved on to this.
Meanwhile, the White House once again rejected Ukrainian president's request for an end to restrictions on Kiev using US-supplied arms to strike Russian territory. The US reiterated it does not encourage or enable US-supplied weapons to strike Russia.
There's no change to our policy at this point. We don't encourage or enable the use of US-supplied weapons to strike inside Russia.
Furthermore, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has urged US President Joe Biden to attend a peace summit, which is all set to be held in Switzerland in mid-June. He said Ukraine's key allies' absence would only be applauded by the Russian President Vladimir Putin. According to the report, Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris are set to miss the summit.
I think the peace summit needs President Biden, and other people who are looking at the response of the United States of America need him. If he is not present, it will be just like applauding Putin, personally applauding and doing so standing.
In the latest, Russian guided bombs killed 2 civilians in the eastern Ukrainian city of Toretsk on Tuesday and heavily damaged 2 multi-story apartment buildings. Pictures shared by Donetsk Regional Governor Vadim Filashkin showed damaged buildings and debris on the ground. Filashkin said that Russian forces deployed 3 bombs in the city.
For more on this, we're now being joined by John Erith, Senior Policy Director for the Center for Arms Control and Non-Proliferation. He's joining us live from Washington, D.C. Welcome to the show, Mr. Erith. Now, the French President, along with the German Chancellor, have said that Ukraine should be allowed to use Western weapons to hit Russian targets, while we witnessed how Putin earlier warned the West, saying that the NATO members were playing with fire with such proposals. How do you see this stance by France and Germany perhaps sparking the rise of a broader conflict?
This is very standard rhetoric from the Russian side. It's been very consistent for the last 2 years that every time there is additional assistance being sent to Ukraine from Western countries, Putin or sometimes Medvedev will say something like this. It's part of a consistent strategy to raise the perception of a threat of a wider conflict and to get the Western countries to self-impose limitations on the assistance that they provide Ukraine.
Mr. Irith, Macron has, of course, distinguished between striking military targets from which Russia is targeting Ukraine and striking military targets otherwise. Now, it's a very fine line. What's to say that Ukraine maintains that line? And if it uses those weapons, targets other military facilities as well, we have an all-out war after that. Is it not playing with fire, as Mr. Putin said?
There is already an all-out war that is underway.
A larger
war
conflict.
that Russia is waging
a larger
on
conflict
Ukraine.
with NATO involvement.
What Russia is asking here is for Ukraine to restrain itself from attacking targets in Russia while Russia is unrestrained in the targets it can attack in Ukraine. That's not the recipe for a winnable war for Ukraine, and that's what Russia wants.
Mr. Irith, now the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, he made the case for allowing Ukraine to hit military bases a few miles inside Russia when he visited Kiev just a few days ago. However, the White House has now come out with a statement saying that it opposes Ukraine using U.S. weapons against Russia, with consensus around the U.S. policy fraying and pressure also mounting. Do you think that the U.S. will allow Ukraine to use American-made weapons against Russia?
It's a very fine line to walk.
Yes.
On the one hand, nobody in Washington wants a escalated war, wants a wider conflict to emerge. On the other hand, Ukraine has an absolute right to defend itself, and that should be allowed to use all the means at its disposal to do so. But within the framework of international law, which means to strike military targets and not civilian ones.
Mr. Irith, do you feel Ukraine has nothing left to lose at this point, because it is, there are high chances that Ukraine burns its own hands here, given the fact that US does not want an all-out war with Russia, and US is already in a certain amount of conflict with several nations where Russia has built its strong ties in the recent 2 years?
It's a decision that the Ukrainian government and the Ukrainian people are going to have to make. On the one hand, it is tremendously disadvantageous in the military sense for Ukraine to suffer these attacks on its territory coming from Russia without any chance to hit back. On the other hand, Ukraine does not want to escalate and does not want to provoke a wider conflict. So it will be a question of finding a balance. What targets to hit inside Russia that would have the maximum military effect and would in some way inhibit Russia's ability to wage war against Ukraine and the Ukrainian population without going too far in provoking that wider conflict.
All right. Thank you for joining in, John, and sharing all your insights. Of course, that was John Irith joining us from Washington, D.C., sharing all his insights. Always a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you very much.
Moving on, 2 days after an alleged Israeli airstrike in Rafah that killed at least 45 Palestinians, IDF says a hidden store of Hamas weapons might have been the actual cause of the deadly blaze that tore through the tents there.
Well, it says the airstrike, which targeted the Hamas commanders in the adjacent area, small munitions were used in it, and that could not ignite such a fire. Now, the statement comes as reports are emerging that Israeli tanks have advanced into the heart of Rafah for the first time.
After a night of heavy bombings, Israeli attacks in Rafah has killed at least 21 Palestinians, according to the authorities in Gaza. Although Israel's military has denied striking a tent camp in west of Rafah, which Israel has designated as a civilian evacuation zone.
Latest assault comes as Israel's 3-week-old Rafah offensive has stirred renewed outrage and prompted an outrage from global leaders. The US, Israel's closest ally, has reiterated its opposition to a major Israeli ground offensive in Rafah, but said it did not believe such an operation is underway.
Washington says it still considers Israel's assault on the southern Gazan city of Rafah is limited in scope. despite a weakened Israeli attack that left 45 people dead as blaze tore through a camp for displaced people.
Describing the U.S. view of what would constitute a major offensive in Rafah, White House National Security spokesperson John Kirby says it will involve large numbers of troops in some sort of coordinated maneuver against multiple targets on the ground. He says that will be a major operation and they have not seen it yet.
Meanwhile, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad militant group has released a video of an Israeli hostage who was kidnapped by militants back in October.
שוברת הלב שהוא עדיין כל כך הרבה זמן בשבי. ואני פונה לכולם, לכל מקבלי ההחלטות, בבקשה.
Shifting focus to the U.S., as former U.S. President Donald Trump's hush money trial is nearing its end, both the sides made their closing arguments.
A New York prosecutor told jurors that Trump engaged in a conspiracy to corrupt the 2016 elections and also attempted to cover it up.
Now, prosecutor Joshua Steinglass told jurors they would need to assess whether Trump falsified business documents to cover up a hush money payment to adult film star Stormy Daniels in the run-up to the 2016 presidential election. He further went on to say that the jurors also needed to consider broader political concerns, such as the possibility of Trump and his allies, including tabloid publisher David Becker, undermining the election by controlling what information would reach voters.
Trump's lawyer urged jurors to look past the details in his criminal trial and focus on the paperwork at the heart of the case. They also argued the jurors should not trust star witness Michael Cohen's testimony. Trump's lawyer, Blanche, said that Cohen is a convicted felon with a record of lying. He also tried to question Stormy Daniels' credibility before the jury begins deliberating on the first ever felony case on Wednesday against the former U.S. president. Closing arguments gave both the sides one last opportunity to win the jury over.
Trump faces 34 felony counts of falsifying business records. Charges are punishable by up to 4 years in prison. The former U.S. president has pleaded not guilty and denied any wrongdoing, although imprisonment is unlikely for a first-time felon convicted of such a crime.
However, a conviction will not prevent Trump from trying to take back the White House from incumbent Democrat Joe Biden in the November 5th election. Trump faces 3 other criminal prosecutions as well, but none is likely to go to trial before the election. He has pleaded not guilty in all of the cases and called them an effort by Biden's Democratic allies to hobble his presidential bid.
Trouble continues to mount for UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and the Tories. The latest incident has laid bare a growing tiff within the party now.
Right, Shivan. Another centre of this debacle is a leaked memo which has stirred trouble within the party.
In a memo leaked to the Times, senior Tories have accused party leaders of not throwing their weight behind the party's election campaign. The memo listed names of several Conservative members of Parliament who refused door-to-door campaigning or had taken time off to attend family events. As per reports, the list was accidentally sent to some MPs as an attachment to a general campaign email.
The incident has sparked outrage among Tory leaders who are already miffed with Rishi Sunak for announcing early elections, despite the party's dismal results in pre-poll surveys.
Responding to the anger within the Conservative camp, Sunak said that he bore full responsibility for a dismal start to election campaigning, saying that those who received the email had been contacted with a formal apology.
I can't help but reflect that my first proper introduction to you was just over 4 years.
Moving on, gruesome details are emerging from the murder of Bangladesh's political leader during his visit to India's northeastern city of Kolkata.
According to reports, local authorities recovered dismembered body parts of the ruling Awami League lawmaker Anwarul Azim Anwar. The parts were recovered from a septic tank in an apartment that he was staying in before he went missing. Police officials have said that a forensic investigation will establish whether the flesh found is human and part of the Bangladesh leader's dismembered body.
Anwarul Azim Anar came to Kolkata on May 12th for medical treatment. The lawmaker was staying with a friend till he went missing a few days later. Officials believe that Anar was murdered in Kolkata on May 22nd. So far, 3 people have been arrested in the case. The West Bengal Criminal Investigation Department has arrested Jihad Havladar, who is an illegal immigrant from Bangladesh and lived in Mumbai. Authorities claim that Havladar has confessed to his involvement in the murder.
Havladar also reportedly claimed that the crime was masterminded by Akhtar Uzzaman, a US citizen of Bangladeshi origin. Havladar said he killed the MP on Akhtar's orders along with 4 other Bangladeshi nationals. According to the police, the MP was first strangled, then his body was cut up into several pieces.
The police say that they are trying to get more information about the case. A special investigation team was formed to probe the gruesome murder. Chief of the Bangladesh Detective Department is also in India to probe the case. "24 years after the Kargil war between India and Pakistan, Nawaz Sharif, who has been elected as PMLN's president, has made a big statement on the 1999 war. Sharif, who was Pakistan's prime minister back then, has now admitted that Islamabad had violated an agreement with India signed by him and India's ex-prime minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee in 1999. Take a listen.
वाजपेयी साहब लाहौर तशरीफ लाए, याद है या नहीं याद है? याददाश्त कमजोर है ना आपकी? तो तशरीफ लाए और हमसे आके यहाँ पे मुआहदा किया। ये अलग बात है कि हमने मुआहदे की खिलाफ वर्जी की, उसमें हमारा कसूर है।
Now, this is for the first time that Pakistan's former Prime Minister has made a public admission of this fact. Sharif made the statement after being elected the party's president unopposed, 6 years after a court ruling had removed him from office. Sharif and Vajpayee signed the Lahore Declaration on February 21st, 1999, the agreement that talked about a vision of peace and stability between the two countries. But just months after that, the much publicized declaration, Pakistan launched an intrusion in India's Jammu and Kashmir. Pakistani troops targeted the Kargil district of J&K.
India's defence forces launched Operation Vijay, which lasted over 2 months. 527 Indian soldiers laid down their lives over the course of war, while 2,700 Pakistani troops lost their life. India's troops declared victory in the Kargil war on July 26th. India commemorates the day every year as Vijay Divas in honor of those who fought in the war and made the supreme sacrifice for the country. Well, it's now time for a quick short break.
Don't go anywhere. This is World D. And of course, we are going to be back after the break on the other side. 10 days after the Porsche crash took place in India's Pune, new developments are coming in from the high-profile case of tampering with evidence and attempts of hushing up the matter even further. We'll get you the full report.
Also on the other side of this short break, South Africa is gearing up for national elections, and we shift our focus to Durban. The third largest city is home to the largest Indian diaspora. The city's economy is booming, but at the same time, it's also facing challenges. More on the other side. Do stay tuned. You're watching Beyond World is One.
Yoga, the age-old Indian practice of wellness.
Ayurveda, healing through diet, herbal remedies, and meditation.
2 timeless traditions.
2 priceless Indian gifts to the world.
From well-being to perfect health.
How can you incorporate yoga and Ayurveda in daily life? As the world gears up for International Yoga Day,
WION celebrates India's gift to mankind on this special series.
Namaste. Hello, friends. We did Dr. Subhash Chandra show, popularly known as DSC show, for 4 years, from August 2014 to August 2018. 28 states of Bharat. Of course, we reached out to all of you in 190 countries across the world. The show was very successful. Each episode was being watched by almost 25 million people every week. For past 6 years, the demand of the show has never died down. People write to us, people ask for the show to restart again. Hence, we are beginning the show once again on All Z Network, also on WION, which is the global network channel from India. Again, thank you for your love and affection. See you soon at Subhash Chandra Show.
Africa's youngest nation goes to the polls in December as politicians of all hues, including current South Sudan's President Salva Kiir, jostle for power. A philanthropic organization urges rebels to surrender by dropping hundreds of thousands of flyers from a helicopter above their strongholds in dense rainforests. And an ancient game called Kora promotes unity and tradition in Algeria's mountains. Watch Wild of Africa at these times on WION. Wild is One.
Know more, understand better, think ahead. Hello and a very warm welcome. You are watching Gravitas with me, Molly Gambhir. Get the facts, not the bombast. On the 26th of March, dynamic pricing, Baloch separatists, Gravitas cuts out the clutter. Gravitas keeps calm when others scream. Gravitas brings news to life. Weekdays, 9 p.m. IST, 3:30 p.m. GMT. Gravitas. Seeing is believing.
Welcome back, viewers. You're watching World DNA with Raisha and me, Shivan. Let's get you started with the headlines we're tracking for you at this hour.
Israel's IDF says hidden store of weapons may have been behind a deadly blaze in Rafah's tent camp, and that its airstrike targeting area used small munitions unable of igniting such blaze.
Washington backs Netanyahu, says recent Rafah deaths do not constitute major ground operation that crosses any US red lines.
France and Germany say Ukraine should be allowed to hit military sites inside Russia from which missiles were being fired at Ukrainian territory, but not other targets. White House still opposes this proposal.
Putin warns West, says NATO members in Europe playing with fire by proposing to let Ukraine use Western weapons to strike deep inside Russia, underlines such activity could trigger a global conflict.
Defense and prosecution deliver closing arguments in Donald Trump's historic New York criminal hush money trial, as both sides finish final pitches to 12-member jury before they begin deliberations.
China helps Nepal look for oil as Beijing seeks to strengthen bilateral ties and competes with India for influence over Himalayan neighbor.
More details tumble out in Pune's high-profile Posha case. Police say 14 calls exchanged between doctor held for switching sample and father of the teen accused 2 hours prior to sample collection.
Georgia's parliament votes to override presidential veto of Russian-inspired foreign agent law, defying fierce protests at home and criticism.
The IMF raises its forecast for China's growth this year to 5%, up from 4.6% previously. IMF attributes the rise to strong first quarter figures and recent policy measures.
Lexi Thompson confirms that she will retire at the end of the 2024 LPGA Tour season. The 29-year-old has won 15 times since turning professional in 2010 and won her only major in 2014. Well, this is the election year and South Africa heads to polls today.
In the most competitive election since the end of apartheid, the ruling African National Party will be put to test for the very first time in history. The question being, can ANC hold on to power, and is the opposition rising on an anti-incumbency mood? My colleague Ananya Datta tells you more.
South Africa is one of the most important countries in the African continent. In the changing world order, many are hopeful of the country's economy. But as Africa teaches us time and again, a good economy needs a stable government. And today, South Africa is staring at the most unpredictable election in its 30 years of democratic rule. Logistics first. Out of the 62 million people, about 45% have registered for this year's elections. A little over 23,000 polling stations have been set up. 70 political parties and 11 independents are in the fray. Now, the elections are for national and provincial elections. It will be the country's 7th election since apartheid ended in the year 1994. That is when Nelson Mandela became the president. But his legacy is what is being put to test this time. Well, the public sentiment has been against the ruling party, and some blame corruption, poor economy, unemployment that is at its highest as we speak, rising instances of crime and power cuts. Some voters say that they just want change. And this is where today's key face is coming in. African National Congress, the ANC, is obviously in the race with Cyril Ramaphosa heading it. Then there is MK Party with Jacob Zuma, who has been disallowed from contesting elections this time. Democratic Alliance Party is also in the fray with John Steenhuisen. An economic freedom fighter under Julius Malema is also in the fray. Now, he interestingly quit the ruling ANC to form this radical leftist party and could potentially become the kingmaker in this year's election. Let's come to the process now. In earlier elections, only political parties competed for 400 seats in the National Assembly. For the very first time, independent candidates will compete in this election. And this is why all voters will receive 3 different ballots this time. Among these, 2 ballots will be electing the National Assembly. The 2 ballots being the Regional National Assembly with 200 seats and National Ballot with 200 seats. So 400 seats making the entire House. And the third will be the electing member of the Provisional Legislature. Remember, South Africans do not directly vote for the president. The majority party chooses their leader and then that leader goes on to become the president.
10 days after the Porsche crash took place in India's Pune, new developments are coming in from the high-profile case.
Of course, these are evidences of tampering with the evidence and attempts of hushing up the matter. According to reports, Pune's crime branch officials have named Dr. Ajay Tavde as the mastermind, who they believe tampered with the blood samples of the accused. Authorities allege that the blood samples of the accused minor were substituted with another individual, and the minor's original blood sample was disposed of in a dustbin. This comes after 2 doctors and a staffer at Pune's Sassoon General Hospital who collected the minor's blood sample after the crash have been arrested for destroying evidence. They have been sent to police custody until the 30th of May.
According to the police probe, Dr. Ajay Tavde, who is the head of the hospital's forensic medicine department, exchanged 14 phone calls with the minor's father 2 hours prior to the collection of the sample. While reports suggest the staffer identified as Atul Ghatkamble and Dr. Srihari Halnor, the chief medical officer of the hospital, both of them who worked under the alleged mastermind Dr. Tavde, received bribe of some $3,600 from him. However, there is no immediate information on how or from where did the doctor procure the cash.
Right, for more on this, our principal correspondent Disha Shah joins us on the phone line, joining us from Mumbai. Disha, you've been tracking this closely. What are the officials from the Pune crime branch saying? What's the latest in regards to this case, these 14 calls that we've just heard about?
Well, absolutely. And at this point in time, the Pune crime branch officials are really monitoring, and they are actually checking the accused residences, if you talk about the 2 doctors and also the fuel, because it's very important to know that where they procured the cash from and at what given point in time they really received the bribe, and who actually was the one who gave them the bribe. It was the minor's father directly, as per what the police officials are stating, or was there some other person also involved in this. So all of this is something which is getting bigger day by day. We are also looking at more than 10 people already being arrested. We are looking at the police custody of the doctors being will end today, and we will come to know more details, because that is the time when the police will produce some more details in front of the court. So at this given point in time, the CCTV footages across the city that the police have seized is acting as a main source of information, because that is where they are able to track the accused movements. And here I'm talking about not one accused, but all the 10. So that is something which is helping them in their daily investigation, is what the police crime branch officials are stating at this point.
Definitely, Disha. It's a daily investigation, and every day we get to hear more details of the case, making it just causing more bewilderment on how this case was treated. That was Disha Shah, principal correspondent, joining us from Mumbai, getting us the latest.
Moving on, amid the sweltering heat in northwest India, the Indian Met Department on Tuesday issued a red alert for May 29th and May 30th for multiple states including Rajasthan, Punjab, Haryana, Delhi, Uttar Pradesh and Madhya Pradesh.
Absolutely, Rahisha. We are in Delhi and we know how badly the heat is affecting everyone around us. Heatwave conditions are also likely to persist in isolated parts of Himachal Pradesh, Chhattisgarh and in Jammu as well on May 29th. Facing extreme heat, people are eagerly waiting for the monsoons. And as per the Met Department, the southwest monsoon is likely to set in Kerala on the 31st of May.
On May 28th, large parts of northern and central India were in the grip of extreme heat wave conditions, with the mercury crossing 50 degrees Celsius in Rajasthan's Churu, Haryana's Sirsa and settling 9 notches above normal in Delhi. According to the IMD, some areas of the national capital recorded highest maximum temperature of the season, with Narela reaching 49.9 degrees Celsius and Najafgarh recording 49.8 degrees Celsius.
The Met Department has forecasted a higher number of heatwave days in northwest India and adjoining parts of the central region in the month of June as well. The severe heatwave is pushing the power demand and leading to water shortages in multiple parts of the country.
Time to take a look at all the news from the world of technology. Well, a US lobby group representing tech giants Google, Amazon and Apple has asked India to rethink its proposed EU-like competition law. The group has said that the regulation could lead to an increase in user costs. India's digital competition bill is similar to EU's Digital Markets Act. The proposed bill prohibits companies from exploiting users' private data and promoting their services over rivals. The bill could also put an end to restrictions on the download of third-party apps. The proposed competition bill will apply to firms that have a global turnover of over $30 billion and whose digital services have at least 10 million users locally.
The Indian government will next review feedback on the proposal before seeking Parliament approval. Greek Data Protection Authority has fined the country's Interior Ministry over voters' email leak. The Interior Ministry has been fined around $400,000 for leaking email addresses of thousands of expatriate voters. The authority said that they launched the investigation in March following dozens of complaints by voters. Voters had complained of receiving emails of political content from a Greek European Parliament member ahead of the EU parliamentary elections. The probe showed a document containing the contact information of more than 20,000 expats who voted in a 2023 national election.
The document contained voters' data, including their email IDs and phone numbers. It has been revealed that the initial leak occurred last year between 8th of June, when the document was created, and June 23rd as well. The Data Protection Authority said that the document was for internal use and the fact that it was leaked constitutes breach of personal data, adding that the ministry should revise its methods in protecting personal data.
OpenAI has set up a safety and security committee which will be led by company board members including CEO Sam Altman. The new committee will be responsible for making recommendations to the board on safety and security decisions. The committee will evaluate and further develop OpenAI's existing safety practices over the next 90 days. OpenAI has said that once approved by the board, the company will publicly share an update on adopted recommendations. The move comes ahead of OpenAI's next artificial intelligence model. Earlier in May, OpenAI announced a new AI model capable of realistic voice, conversation and interaction across text and image. China's economic growth, a major driver of the global economy for decades, is facing new challenges now.
Right, Shivan, a rapidly aging population and a slowdown in key sectors are raising concerns about the country's future economic growth. Take a look at our next report for more.
China's economic miracle faces a demographic hurdle. The percentage of its population over 65 has skyrocketed from 7% in 1998 to 15.4% in 2023. This rapid aging is unprecedented, and experts warn it could significantly impact future growth. Historically, no nation has achieved high economic growth of over 4% after reaching a 15% elderly population share. This raises concerns as China's GDP growth, though still outpacing the US, has slowed in recent years. Demographers predict a significant slowdown for China. They forecast a drop to 3% growth by 2028, with the US potentially surpassing China by 2031 to 2035. The US Congressional Budget Office projects a more gradual slowdown for the US, with growth easing from 2.2% to 1.9% by the early 2030s. This potential shift could have major global ramifications. China's economic slowdown isn't solely due to demographics. An eroding trade surplus, low interest rates, and deflationary pressures are weakening its currency and hindering growth. Additionally, stagnant household income and shrinking workforce further complicate the picture. Experts believe tackling these issues requires a significant political and economic overhaul, something China may be hesitant to undertake. This, coupled with the ongoing real estate crisis, high youth unemployment, and trade tensions, paint a concerning picture for China's economic future. Some experts even predict a lost decade of stagnation. Business Bureau, WION, World is One.
Major multinational companies initially announced plans to leave Russia after the Ukraine invasion.
However, they remain stuck due to bureaucratic hurdles and a 50% discount mandate on selling assets to unfriendly countries. Now, this combined with a minimum 15% exit tax has complicated departures even further. The Kiev School of Economics reports that over 2,100 multinational companies have stayed in Russia since 2022. While the initial focus was on leaving Russia to isolate its economy, the situation has evolved since then. A surprising consumer spending boom in Russia has made it more attractive to some businesses to stay put there, particularly in consumer goods.
Companies like Mondelez are reevaluating, with their CEO stating investors are less concerned about the morality of remaining. Food and beverage companies face a unique challenge there. They emphasize their humanitarian responsibility to maintain basic food supplies. Coca-Cola, for example, continues operating a Russian bottler that produces Dobry Cola, now the top-selling cola in Russia.
Now, this raises questions about brand dilution despite the company distancing itself from the product. Meanwhile, PepsiCo maintains its dairy business in Russia, citing the needs of its 60,000 employees.
The overall picture is, however, complex. Western companies grapple with moral obligations, economic realities, and the potential consequence of leaving, as seen in Carlsberg's ongoing legal battle and imprisoned executive. The initial exodus may have stalled, with companies reevaluating their positions in Russia's evolving economic landscape.
Alright, here's a quick look at all that's happening in the world of sports, starting with world number 1, Novak Djokovic, who's up and running at the French Open. The defending champion brushed aside any doubts about the state of his game with a straight sets win over local hope Pierre Hugh.